Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. This is season 2, episode 8, I believe. And we actually have a special guest today. You guys may know her as Delighted to Meet You on Instagram and other platforms as well, but I'm going to let her be doing the introductions.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Jen, and yes, delighted to meet you on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the things. Basically, I am a 38-year-old Kansas girl, physical therapist, carnivore. So, about a little over a year ago, I changed my diet drastically to really just include animal products because I was dealing with a lot of chronic illness and it has changed my life for the better in so many ways. And I sort of became a baby accidental influencer, I would say. I mean, I have, a small but growing following, but enough that I've actually changed my work life so that I'm now working part-time as a physical therapist and full-time as a carnivore content creator.
Wow, that's a crazy switch. Like all of that with the diet and then suddenly just like getting a bunch of followers and all of that. It's like um so explain a little bit how kind of you got into carnivore with your lifestyle and all that stuff. I know like I myself am carnivore and I have arthritis. So that's kind of like the main reason that I started, but I am still a newbie. I've been doing it for like 2 months now. So it's been an interesting trip, but I love it so far. So
That's awesome. And I imagine your listeners can't see you, but you're just glowing, and I'm sure it's from your diet.
thank you. Yeah, it's changed a lot quite like I've actually find that in the first month of doing carnivore already like my inflammation went down so quickly, and usually it takes about like 6 months to a year when I have a flare up. So after just being on it for like the first 2 weeks, even though like I was experiencing all of these like changes in my body, um I started to notice. I was just like, this, I think this is the diet. This is the lifestyle that I'm supposed to be on. So yeah, explain a little bit about kind of what you went through as well, because I'd love to have like people hear more about this as well. So
Sure. So I'll take it all the way back. When I was 7, I was diagnosed with psoriasis, and I spent the next 20 something years after that having moderate psoriasis, bad enough that my dermatologist always wanted me to go on kind of higher dose, higher, more dangerous drugs, I guess. He wasn't calling it that, more dangerous, but more potent drugs, we'll say. And I resisted, always saying, well, this is just cosmetic. I mean, it was on my arms and my legs and on my trunk, to the point that, I'd be embarrassed to be in a swimsuit or to be in a relationship that I was intimate, something like that. It was bad enough for that. But it's like if I was in regular clothing, most people couldn't see it. But then in my early 30s, it started to get really bad, to the point that I was really embarrassed. And, sleeping in beds with, you wake up and there's just flakes all over the sheets from your psoriasis skin, and scalp peeling all the time. And you just want to cover up with long sleeves and long pants, regardless of the heat. And it was affecting my life more. And so a few years later, in my mid 30s, I decided to finally start taking some of these drugs that my dermatologist was recommending. Initially, it was oral immunosuppressants, and then it was injectable um, systemic drugs. And so, my skin was completely clear. It was a miracle. I was so happy. But almost immediately after getting on those kinds of drugs, I started having all kinds of side effects. And one of the main ones was just a chronic sore throat that I just battled for a year after going on an immunosuppressant injection, and then turned into a raging strep throat. And I had to be on all these medicines for the strep throat. Meanwhile, I developed this crazy rash all over my whole body while I was on the antibiotics for the strep throat. And so I was in and out of the emergency department and multiple different doctors. This is over the course of like a week, but just nobody could figure out what was causing the rash. Is it a result of the antibiotics, like having an allergy to it, or at one point they thought maybe I had a tick-borne illness. Oh my gosh, it just so many things. So turns out I had vasculitis, which could have been from the antibiotics, could have been from the severity of the strep throat, could have been from my autoimmune condition. Like, still nobody knows. And I saw so many doctors. And so that was terrible, terrible, terrible. And then 6 months later, I ended up with the worst psoriasis by 10 million that I'd ever had in my life. And I was still on the immunosuppressant, and my skin was still just raging terrible. And so at that point, I was just kind of fed up with one health problem after the other, after the other. And I just was willing to do anything. And I had seen so many different specialists, so many doctors, that I just felt like I'd kind of lost hope in that. So I went to a naturopath, and honestly, he didn't help me that much. He did a bunch of testing of my urine and my stool and my blood and all kinds of things, and didn't find anything really, really off. And I had some food allergy testing, and nothing really came back with that. But he had a nutritionist in his office who, frankly, I think she was just experimenting with the carnivore diet herself. And so she happened to mention it. And that was the like the flip that happened for me. So after she told me about that, I went home and researched it, and I found out about people like Michaela Peterson and Kelly Hogan, and just felt like, okay, this is exactly what I need to do. I have not tried anything like this. I also had a lifetime of binge eating. And so in the past, when I've restricted my diet in a way where I'm cutting food groups out, it's always resulted in me sort of rebelling and binging. And so, I figured that would happen with the carnivore diet too, but turns out it's basically been the cure for that as well.
Mhm.
So the long answer to your question, how did I get into this? That is how, to help my bunch of health issues, but specifically psoriasis.
That is a crazy story. Yeah, I actually it's so interesting that like Western medicine, and I find that even now, like with the holistic side as well, they're starting to learn that there's many like faults in it, but there's still so many people that are trying to kind of figure out what the problems are. And even like the people that are in the system itself still have no idea that any of these things are going on, and it's just the stuff that they've been taught. That's just how the medical system is, unfortunately. And I have had like my own personal experiences with that, with arthritis as well, like being on so many different medications, being on doing so many different tests, doing so many things, and they have no idea what's going on. They're just like, oh, like that's just how it is. That's just what it is. And also with myself being, they were saying like, oh, you're just gonna be blind in a wheelchair by the age of 20, and that's it. Like that's all. So yeah, now I'm 23 and like nothing, like walking fine, not blind. So it's just like it's interesting to see now like so many people going into carnivore as well and healing all of these problems. And it's not just like only people that have arthritis. It's like people that
Mhm.
have like so many different illnesses that are going on to this, that I'm kind of like saying like, it's interesting that the foods that we were consuming since the beginning of time is actually the answer to the problems that we're having. So it's just like, it's so interesting to see that now like people are just going kind of like opening up. And I think like even with like social media and all of these stuff, it's good for people to kind of see what's going on, um health wise, fitness and all this stuff. Like people are going into, even with spirituality and these things, to kind of like this generation is slowly kind of opening up to more ideas and not just kind of taking things as is. And I find that that's what's pretty beautiful to see, kind of from different perspectives of humans and all of that stuff. So yeah, like thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to talk about kind of like how if you're doing anything like with fitness as well, because I've seen that you've been you posted something about that as well, and you have it on your bio. So like what is that about? Like what do you do in regards to fitness for your health?
Sure. So fitness has been a big part of my life for most of my life. I mean, growing up in school, I played sports and stuff, which that was, embarrassing when my legs were covered in psoriasis and I'm 15 and the girls on the basketball team are like, "What's on your legs?" But I have always been pretty active. Now I mostly incorporate a lot of strength training. So I do that 5 days a week. And I just finished something called the Live Hard program, which is, if you've ever heard of 75 hard, you have to do 2 workouts a day, every day, 45 minutes each, and one has to be outside. You have to drink a gallon of water a day, read 10 pages of like self-improvement a day, take a daily progress photo, and follow any diet. That is 75 hard. And you have to do that for 75 days. And it's really not a fitness challenge, it's a mental toughness challenge. It
Mm.
teaches you grit and perseverance and self-reliance, and it teaches you to finish the things that you start. But the Live Hard program is when you do 75 hard, and then you do phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and each one is 30 days. And during those phases, you do all of those things I listed plus more things depending on the phase. And so by the end of a year, you were on something for 145 days, I think, out of 365, something like that. So like almost half the time you're on some phase. So yeah, for the last year I've been really busy with that. So most of my fitness included lifting and then a lot of walking. So, but that's sort of just not, I don't even think of walking as exercise, but it is. It's
Yeah.
moving and you're getting fresh air if you're outside and you're getting vitamin D. And I think mental health wise, walking is one of the best things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what my fitness routine looks like. And I mean, I'm a physical therapist, so I have to be mobile and strong. I work in a hospital, a trauma hospital. So I literally lift humans for a living. So I have to be pretty strong to do that.
Definitely. Yeah, so in regards to like mental health, what has been like your struggles with it and what do you find has helped you the most?
So there are lots of carnivores out there that have had serious mental health issues like bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, gosh, all kinds of things. And I always felt like, well, I don't have any of that. So I guess I don't have any mental health issues. But I think having a binge eating disorder is somewhat a mental health problem. And so that has resolved, well, mostly resolved for me on a carnivore diet. I found that if I try to restrict my calories, I still have some of those old thoughts and feelings back a little bit of like, oh, I got to eat all the things. And oh, I'm not hungry, but this might be my last chance to eat this pack of bacon or whatever the thing is. I still have that a little if I try to restrict calories too much. But in general, just the anxiety and the shame and the just constant thinking about food that you have when you have a binge eating problem, I mostly do not have that anymore. So I would say that is due to the carnivore diet. So my mood is just a little bit more stable. Although again, I wouldn't say it was terrible before outside the binging. But sometimes this feels a little weird. Sometimes I almost feel like I'm in this state of elation, which I can't explain. I didn't really have that before I was a carnivore, but most days I just feel normal. And then at
Mm-hmm.
times I'm like, ooh, why do I feel so good? And I don't know if I'm just flooded with nutrients or what, but I'll take it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I've noticed that myself. I don't know what it is. There's some sort there's some sort of natural kick to the carnivore diet. Even when I wake up now, it's just like the energy that I feel. Like before I used to feel so much more like sluggish and stuff like that. But I find that even my motivation to like create content and stuff like that has been surprisingly good. Like it's just been I just been getting some sort of kick. So maybe there's something there with carnivore.
Maybe so. We needed all these vitamins and minerals all along and we just weren't getting them. Now that we are, we're superhuman.
Yeah, it's interesting because even like so what's your experience kind of like socializing with people in regards to even with like now doing carnivore and going out
Mhm.
um even like because I know that like Michaela Peterson as well talked about this quite a bit with her and her dad and how they say that they don't get invited out to places anymore because of being carnivore and things like that. I haven't had that experience. I've still been going out myself, but it has been different, but it's interesting being a part of kind of like a social circle or something, being on in being on like in a table and seeing everybody eat and then just like either not eating or getting a steak. So like what has been your experience with that?
I've had a lot of experience with this because last year I went on a trip every month, and then I've also been dating last year and this
Mm-hmm.
year. So I've been on a lot of dates and a lot of traveling while being a carnivore. And honestly, my experience has mostly just been positive. And I think partly because I've been pretty open about my diet. And so,
Mm-hmm.
guys that I'm dating or friends that I'm hanging out with or whatever, or my family, they know what to expect from the get go. And so they all tend to be very accommodating. And of course, maybe I'll go to a party with a charcuterie board or something, and 90% of the things I can't eat, and that's fine. But it's like they got something special just for me, some smoked salmon or some ribs or whatever the thing is, which means a lot to me. And honestly, those are the things I want to eat anyway. I don't really care about the chocolate covered raisins or whatever the thing is. And then same with dating. I mean, I've been honest about it from the beginning. And so then the restaurant choice is always someplace where there's things that I can eat. When it comes to drinking, I know some carnivores do drink some. I really don't because it mostly because I only like frou-frou drinks that have a bunch of sugar anyway. And then it makes me want to eat foods that are not carnivore. So
Mm-hmm.
I just do better without it. So what I do is I just get a sparkling water with a fruit garnish on the cup, and I've done that at resorts in Mexico. I've done that on dates. I've done that at weddings. And so most people just assume you're drinking based on what they see. And not that that matters, but it does make it feel a little less like you're the center of attention in a bad way. So yeah, so people just assume. Plus, my hand is busy. I enjoy that what I'm drinking. And so it really hasn't been a problem as long as I'm just willing to know I'm going to do something a little bit different, but it's not because I have to, it's because I'm choosing to. And
Mm-hmm.
looking at it that way has been really helpful.
Yeah, it's very I actually find that yeah, people have been kind of open and accepting towards it. Except for the vegans that I've been that been messaging me on social media. Or people that have been messaging me saying like, please tell me that you're not on the carnivore diet. I'm like, why? Like everyone's just like, oh, you need greens and you need these elements and you need all of these stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But I try to kind of like I inform people about it. I'm like, okay, like thank you so much for your input and all that stuff. But watch this video, watch this, and then talk to me. But it's funny because I send them one or two videos, they watch it, and so far it's like a lot of people have been actually like, you know what? I'm curious to see how this is gonna go for you. And I haven't had any negative reactions towards that, even with some vegans as well. So
That's awesome.
it's it's good. It's like I've been seeing so much of your content and stuff, and I can see why it blew up because you have such great content, by the way. It's amazing. I love all of your videos.
Thank you so much.
So with your content creating, like how's your process like with that?
Mm. It's still sort of a work in progress for me. I'm still learning how to best do it. And I'll tell you what, doing the Live Hard program really helped me to get more efficient with my work because I had so many tasks to do for that challenge that I had to be very mindful of how I was scheduling my day work wise, or I was not getting anything done. But what I'm doing now that seems to work is usually Sunday night or Monday morning, I sort of write down all the tasks that I need to get done during the week, and then I sort of schedule them on each day. So today, for example, my schedule looks like gym, listen to this podcast I listen to every day, and then like 15 specific tasks that I need to do for content creation. So captioning a YouTube video and updating my link tree to have the new YouTube video, doing this podcast, doing a Zoom call that I had a little bit ago, posting a TikTok and a reel and a YouTube short, I mean, those things are all batched mostly from last week. So I just post them today. I mean, those are just ideas, but there's probably double that of just individual tasks that I need to get done. And I get a little overwhelmed when I have so many things to do. So for example, I have a bunch of videos I need to edit to then send to some actual editors that I pay. So a lot of my videos are good because professionals do it. But I start it. I have to get the footage together and edit it a little and then sent to them. And so that task is always overwhelming to me. So this morning I spent an hour or two doing that. And I just was like, oh, I cannot do this anymore. So I stopped doing that and then immediately moved to something else on the list rather than just stopping altogether and not doing anything. Like, just scrolling social media for nothing. So that's helped me to have it written down and then I can check it off, mark it off. And then by the end of the day, even if I feel like, gosh, dang it, I wasted so much time and I just didn't get anything done, I can look back at my list and see the 12 things I crossed off and feel way better.
Mm-hmm.
So
Those are great tips.
that's what my Monday through Friday looks like. And then Saturday and Sunday, I work at the hospital all day. So I don't get much done on those days, carnivore wise.
Mm-hmm. You're very busy.
Very, and I'm trying to date. So
That's
it's
that.
kind of
Yeah, the dating, we'll get into that soon because it's very interesting, I find. And everybody's been having like so many different experiences. Like how I've been like interviewing so many different people on the podcast. And even with like mental health, with dating, with diet, all of that stuff, but there's been some interesting patterns that I've been seeing from different people. So I'm kind of curious to kind of see like how that's like for you as well. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So I see that you have like a religious background. How has religion been like in your life, or how have you found God or higher power or whatever it is that you believe in?
Sure. Well, no one has ever asked me this on a podcast, so let me just say that I appreciate it. I'm happy to talk about it. I grew up in a home with a teen mom and welfare and all the bad things that come with a single mom household, a lot of bad stuff. And I did not grow up in a Christian home. Really, no one else in my family has any kind of religion. And I'm a Christian. But when I was 4 or 5, my neighbor started taking me to church. And honestly, it was like the only escape from my life. So I loved it. And I went all through probably grade school years. And I would say, I mean, if somebody asked me at that time, are you a Christian? I would say yes, though I'm not sure that really meant much to me at that time. And then I went through probably middle school and sort of started taking the path that is pretty typical in my family of, dating boys when you're like 12 or 13 and doing things that you probably should not be doing and starting to experiment with drugs. And, I was definitely headed that direction. I did not get super deep into it, but that's where I was headed. And then early high school, I started getting more into sports. And I think that just really changed my friend group for the better, in my opinion. I suppose it depends on, how you feel about all of that. But, my friends then in high school were not the ones I had earlier in my life, ended up having multiple kids in high school, stuff like that. And then these friends were, talking about college. It was a completely different mindset. And so at that time, I was making friends with other Christians. And so my faith became a bigger part of my life again. I was going to church. I was like going to church camps in the summer. It's so cheesy, but it's true. And so that's when I really started to sort of develop my own faith and my own beliefs about what being a Christian means and how I want to live my life. And then I went to a Christian college too. I haven't talked much about this. I don't know if any of my followers would even know that. It was like a strict, like a footloose type of situation where you can't dance, can't have boys in your dorm room, you can't have rated R movies. And I'm not even saying that's a good thing, but it did help me to kind of not only just like strengthen my faith, but like make it be part of me. This is truly a part of who I am. And so, ever since age 15 and up, I would say my faith is one of my main sort of priorities in my life. And I don't always exemplify that, but I sure try, and I try to be mindful that it's something I want to work toward and incorporate those kinds of things into my life.
That's such a beautiful story. I'm glad I asked that question because now people will know more about that.
There you go.
So have you had anything inexplainable happen to you?
Um, Gosh. Okay, you probably sent me this question ahead of time, and I don't remember coming up with a good answer. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. And I know a lot of people, Christians especially, have this list of things that it's like, well, this was definitely a God thing. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that I have a lot of those. Um, and I mean, I still struggle a little bit. I think like a strong Christian would say this is a struggle I have, that I tend to rely on myself and sort
Mm-hmm.
of how I can make things happen instead of like praying about something and letting God do it. I tend to be the pusher,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of, and I had to do that growing up. I had to get myself out of where I was coming from to create this whole different life. And so I still feel like I have to rely on myself the most. And that's not probably the best way to be for anybody, whether you're a Christian or not, to
Mm-hmm.
allow other people to help you. And, um, that's just not easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't think of anything inexplainable. I feel like everything has an explanation, and it's because I made it happen that way.
And who knows, like that may be your form of God helping you. So,
Maybe so. Maybe
it's
this way to be really resilient and to be able to
mhm.
take charge and stuff like that.
Yeah, because everyone does have different experiences. Like sometimes, people just leave it up and be like, okay, this is out of my power and this is nothing I can do. But some people they need to make it happen, and that's probably also God's way. So, in this topic, before we get into the sex segment, have you unlearned anything recently?
Um, so I am in healthcare myself. I have a doctor of physical therapy and a biology degree from my undergrad years. But I honestly feel like I've unlearned a little bit to rely on our healthcare system. And it's so sad to say because I still work in it. And I think it's full of wonderful people that really want to help people. But it's like you said before, it's like they just sort of hear whatever the problem is and say, okay, well, I don't know, take this, but probably you're just going to have these problems forever. And so it's just really tough to see. And it's really hard working in the hospital, specifically with patients when they're really sick, because now that I've seen how much diet has impacted my health, I see these people that are so sick, maybe with dementia or diabetes or whatever I mean, all the problems. And honestly, they all have about 50 problems. It's not like they just have one. And they're just eating, pancakes and McDonald's hash browns and Diet Cokes for breakfast. And it's just so terrible. It's really hard to see day in and day out. And the doctors aren't even looking at that as a possible, even a factor in their health. They just want to prescribe a bunch of meds. And no, I think they don't have time to dig in more. They also don't really have like a financial incentive to get people really well, which is unfortunate. The hospitals make money from sick people. So that's what I've unlearned. Don't put all my eggs in the healthcare basket.
Hmm. Yeah, that's kind of a tough one too, because as much as you kind of want to help, as much as you want to kind of, give your opinion and all that stuff, like at the end of the day, it's like, you gotta let people do what they gotta do, and that's that's the unfortunate part. But hopefully, with social media, with YouTube, with the internet, and all of that stuff, people like you, people like myself, other influencers and all that stuff can help people get answers in regards to their problems if they are looking for it, because that's another thing too. Sometimes people just aren't looking for the answers and they want to be in the victimized stage throughout their whole life.
Yeah, you're really right about that. So you kind of just have to let those ones go, which
Mm-hmm.
is the beauty of social media. People find you. And so the ones that want help, they reach out, and instead of you trying to sell yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we're gonna get into the sex segment. And this one we're gonna be talking about like just all sorts of like dating and relationships and all of that jazz. So you talked a little bit about like your background growing up, but how was sex portrayed in your household?
It was definitely not something that we ever talked about. Although I do remember my mom saying multiple times that if I had a baby, she would love me and help me take care of it. I think maybe because she and all her sisters all had kids as teens, she felt like that was important for me to know that I would still be accepted and loved by her. But that was really it as far as sex goes. Otherwise, I sort of viewed sex as like a sexy thing, just from like little bits of porn that I accidentally saw on TV, or, knowing about like um the negative parts of sex, like, you know, be abuse and stuff like that. Those kinds of things that you see growing up, whether it's yourself or other people or whatever, just knowing those kinds of things are going on when you're growing up in a situation with no dad, no money, whatever. We don't have to go super deep into that. But like, so my view of sex was that it was very sexual instead of a loving thing.
Mm,
And I never really even, I still haven't really seen sex portrayed in like a sort of a relationshipy loving kind of way. It, like in my family or my anybody close to my life when I was a kid. But I mean, I definitely see that just from my own relationships
mm-hmm.
and my peers and that kind of thing. So I guess I would say my view of sex now is that it's like normal and can be really loving and pure and whatever, versus this like animal instinct, I guess.
Mm-hmm. How would you find that like religion has affected sex and relationships for you?
Gosh, a lot. So I was a virgin when I got married. I've
Mm,
been married and divorced, by the way. I was married at 24, divorced at 28, and my husband and I were both virgins. And I think I was I was very black and white about, well, how could anybody get pregnant outside of marriage? Like, why would, these things are so easy not to do.
mm,
And then I got married and got divorced, and obviously my views changed a lot of like, nobody is perfect, and you I mean, people make mistakes all the time, and whether that's related to sex or not, whether it's related to relationships or not, that's just how it goes. Life is not perfect. You personally make bad choices, sometimes other people do too. And so that I'm sort of veering off the question a bit, but how has my faith affected my sexuality, I guess. So in my marriage with my virgin husband, like my virgin self, sex was very like, okay, it's this thing that we just do, and it was never very satisfying for me, to be honest. He'll never hear this, so that's good. Um, and then, after I got out of that relationship, a whole new world opened up to me of like
mm,
what sex could actually be. It's not just this rote thing that you do every 2 weeks or something really infrequent like that. It's like actually really fun, and that's how you can connect with a partner, and it can be really satisfying for the girl too, and that kind of thing. But it was a hard switch for me to go from being married and only having sex with my husband to being in other loving relationships but not married.
mm,
I struggled with that for a while because I do believe that sex is really meant for a man and a wife, and or for a married couple, and that there are consequences to having sex when you're not married, like unwanted pregnancies or feelings that are negative about insecurities or whatever. I think those things are better when sex is within marriage, but I also now am not so unrealistic about
mm-hmm.
everyone should just wait till marriage. And I mean, I've only been married the one time, and I've had more than the one partner. So my views have changed a lot. And I probably, I mean, if I'm being honest, I probably still have like a teensy weensy bit of guilt about it because of my Christian faith. But it's kind of one of those things that I just sort of do anyway, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think that even not with just religion, but I think that that's oftentimes being a woman, um, with in regards to sex and all of that stuff, it's still unfortunately like a taboo thing, or it has a shame involved to it of, you know, uh having it as a pleasure thing and not just kind of like a procreating thing, and not just a thing within marriage, sometimes does have an effect with mental health and all of these things, and with women in particular, because men, they grow up a little bit differently, especially with pornography and all of that stuff. As for women, not to say that they don't see that, because it happens, but I do find that it affects women differently. So it's interesting to hear your views on that as well. Mhm. So now that you're going back into dating, like how long has it been that you've been going on dates as of recently?
Well, let's see. I had my last boyfriend was about a year and a half ago, and we dated for a year. So I've been dating on and off since then. I usually date for a month or two, and then I just get totally burned out on it and take a few months off. But most recently, I've been actively dating for, I don't know, 6 weeks. But usually when I'm dating, I'm all in. So I'll be going on 2 or 3 dates a week with different guys, and it's basically like work. Um, it's fun too, but it's
Yeah.
tough when I have such a tight schedule. But that's kind of helped. It's made me weed out the guys that are okay for only the ones that are really good, because
Mm.
I don't have time for okay.
Yeah. With Are you doing like dating apps at the moment? Like, is that how
Yeah.
you're majority meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, I mostly meet guys on dating apps. I mean, a few have been set up. So I actually have a couple coworkers who twice now have set me up with visitors from the hospital, which is silly, but I mean, I guess whatever, they know me, so they kind of know what I would be interested in. So that's been a interesting path, but it's been good.
Yeah, I've never been set up before. I'm usually the matchmaker for my friends.
Okay.
So yeah, that's an interesting experience. Is there anything that you've noticed that has been kind of a pattern in dating?
Like a pattern for me in dating, I've recently realized, is that like I mentioned before, I tend to be the person who's like, okay, let's do this and this is how this should go. And I've been finding that the guys I've been dating, I think it's like it feels like I'm overpowering them, like they're too passive. I want them to be the man in the relationship, which I know is like a gender stereotype, but I'm a little conservative in that way. Um, and I'm not finding that. And I've realized from this book I've been reading, actually, that one of my Instagram followers recommended, that I'm probably bringing that on myself, because I'm the one who's maybe initiating the conversation first, and then initiating where we should have our first date, and sort of calling all the shots,
Mm-hmm.
instead of allowing them to sort of use their masculinity and lead me a little bit. And
Mm.
so it's really hard for me to turn that off. And I don't want to completely, but I can see some room for softening myself a little bit to find the kind of guy that I actually want to be with, which is the kind of guy who is going to be a little more chivalrous and a little bit more, not aggressive, but a little more assertive
Mm-hmm.
and taking charge and not letting me just always lead the way. So that's probably the pattern I've been most focused on lately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you'll find that person, because I have also been through many past relationships where I felt like I was also taking the lead in a lot of them, and I felt like that I wasn't able to be in my feminine energetically, because I was always kind of like in my masculine. But this is like the first relationship that I've had that I was like, oh my God, I can be a woman. I could kind of let that go a little bit, which is really interesting to see because a lot of the things is like that's a part of this day and age too. That's another thing. It's and that's like a whole other story, but in regards to that comes with background, that comes with the generation, that comes with the food we're eating too.
Mm.
Unfortunately, all of that has an effect. Um and again, it's like you were saying with the whole with like the medical system too. It's like those things aren't taken into factor. So
Yeah,
all of
I agree.
that's connected. um in your going from girl to woman, what has been the biggest struggle?
Hmm. Gosh, I guess trying to control too much for myself because as a girl, I mean, this doesn't even necessarily have to do with being a female, but my experience as a girl, my life was just kind of getting through some things that were out of my control. And then as a woman, especially once I was an adult and living on my own, um, like being more mindful of, oh gosh, I don't know where I even want to go with this. Um, controlling my own environment, only putting myself in positions that are, well, trying to only put myself in positions that are like safe emotionally, physically, all of that kind of thing. And I think that's a little bit hard to navigate when you come from a pretty broken past. Uh, which doesn't make any sense when I'm like, I was a virgin when I got married, and
Mm,
I dated this Christian boy and whatever. But that was still really hard when I was
mm-hmm,
18, 19, 20 to figure out how to um, keep myself out of situations that would not have led me down the path that I did go down. And I guess because I don't know, I almost feel like you're gonna have to cut this from the podcast, but
yeah.
the way that my body looks is very like sexual. That's just
Mm-hmm,
how I look. And
mm-hmm,
so I think at that early age, having that body, it was a little confusing to people between how I looked and what I was saying and doing. And so it took me a long time to learn that it's okay that I look like this. Um, and it doesn't give anybody the right to treat me a certain way or anything like that. And I'm honestly, I wouldn't say I'm still learning this. I'm almost 40 now. I've learned it, but I'm just aware of it now, of like
mm-hmm,
how I look and what I do and say, and how that may, like, even on social media, I feel like I have to be a little more buttoned up
mm,
because I don't want, I think that I sometimes can give the wrong impression. And actually, okay, this is going to start making more sense. It circles back together a little more. As a physical therapist, I used to work in an outpatient setting where I would see the same patients 3 times a week for an hour for months. And so you develop pretty strong relationships with people in that kind of time. And I had several situations where the guy would definitely have the wrong idea about what our relationship was. To me, it was professional. To him, it was not. So I ended up with a stalker situation that went on for a couple years, and then just lots of other uncomfortable situations that are absolutely not my fault.
mm-hmm,
But again, I think it's just I have to be really aware of the way I present myself physically and also the way I speak to people, um, so that it's not misleading, I guess.
mm-hmm. My sister, I think she's kind of going through that. She has like it's the same thing for her right now, but she's still young, so she's still kind of navigating through that as well. But all of the stories and stuff that you've said so far, I could kind of see with her as well.
Hmm.
But that's the thing. It's like there's always pros and cons when it comes to bodies and being a woman and all of these things. It's just like different experiences. For me, on the other hand, It's that I naturally look very young. I've always looked very young. I've always had kind of like a boyish body. So it was very different in that perspective. It's like for me, it was just like more like people taking me seriously was an
Mhm.
issue. And it's just like to feel to feel sexy or more sensual was more difficult because for me I was always known as kind of like the cute, the petite. So it's like it's interesting seeing that too because even with like me and my sister, she wants to be the cute. She wants
Mhm.
to be the opposite. She's like, I wish like people would see me as cute and not this like sexual or this sensual like curvy woman. Um and yeah, and for me, I'm like, oh, it's interesting because like the way we are is also very like polar opposites. Like we have like everything that people think she is kind of like more of like what I am and and the opposite kind of thing. So it's very interesting seeing that and also hearing about different women and their lifestyle and dating all of that jazz because it's like yeah, it is something that's difficult and even in regards to kind of like stalkers or like creepy men, all of these things. So many women that have even come onto this podcast have talked about the fact that these things have happened to them. It's not something that's like uncommon, which is actually like really sad to hear.
Yeah, so sad. And it's so interesting to hear your perspective because it's like we kind of feel like our problem is the just this random problem. Nobody else has this problem. But there's everybody has something. And like you said, that transition from girl to woman is just crazy for everyone. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it's gotta be crazier for girls than it is for guys, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they are going through their own thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's kind of good to keep in mind that we're all transitioning and continuing to in our 20s and 30s, and I'm sure way beyond. So just kind of having a little grace with yourself and other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. And of course, if you want to cut out any part, we always could.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not worried about it at all. It's just if
Mm-hmm.
you're like, this makes no sense. This is circling around and around. And you do everything you do editing wise.
Mhm. I actually wanted to ask this too because I always ask everybody this, but I'm curious, just like hearing all of your stories and stuff. What is your zodiac sign?
A Taurus.
Taurus. Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually thought it was Taurus. It's just funny.
I believe you. And I don't know
Yeah,
much about zodiac signs. I don't know any but my own, but the little bits I know about the Taurus are very accurate. Being very bullheaded and stubborn and
yeah.
kind of always feeling like I'm the right one. I try to work on those things. I don't think they're necessarily my strengths, but they those characteristics are definitely there.
Mm-hmm. So now we're wrapping up on the podcast and all of that. I want to ask, do you have any advice for any listeners out there? Anything at all, or anything you've learned? Could be anything.
Okay, so this kind of relates to being a carnivore and being a woman and just all the things. Um, just my advice is to do the work to figure out just who you are, whether that's reading different books or going to seminars or following some relationship expert on social media or whatever. There's so many ways to dive into what you are, who you are, personality wise, your interests, all of that. Do that work and then be that, and don't be apologetic about it, because if it's not the right person for a certain friend or a certain partner or whatever, then that's okay. Like that person is not meant to be your person. But I think the more you know yourself and you embrace it and you love it, the more those other people are going to embrace it and love it too.
Mhm. Thank you. That was really beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it, and I think that a lot of people love hearing all the stories and yeah. Yeah, so tell people where they can find you if they're interested in seeing, your Instagram or YouTube and all of that.
So I'm on Instagram mostly, and my page is called Delighted to Meet You, which is MEAT. Delighted to Meet You. Same name on YouTube and also TikTok, but honestly, TikTok is just stuff from Instagram that I put on
Yeah.
TikTok. So Instagram is where we could connect every day. YouTube, I do have new stuff a few times a week.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I will see you guys next week. Bye.